welcome. You made it. You made it past the introduction. That is the first hill that we have to climb over, and you have made it. So give yourself a little pat on the back. Yeah, just give yourself a nice little pat on the back. We are moving on to Module 1-2, and that is using a workstation. That's what we're going to be covering today. So what are our objectives for today? Well, first and foremost, we want to learn how to set up a new computer, and we want to make sure that we're doing that in the safest way possible. Okay, so making sure that we know what anti-static wristbands are, making sure that there are no shock hazards, anything like that. So we got to cover the safety stuff first, and then we also have to talk about kind of how to navigate the operating system and what these different input devices do, our mice and our keyboard, and kind of what role they play in this whole thing. Okay, so first and foremost, when you're setting up a new computer, okay, so we just opened up a box and we're staring down and we see styrofoam. Okay, what do we need to do? Well, first and foremost, we need to check our contents. Okay, and that might sound silly, like, oh, well, it just showed up. Like, why do we have to check it? Well, when you're in an environment, so let's say a school system, for example, okay, and let's say 30 computers show up, you go through and you go to set them up, and then maybe you're not using a certain part, like a AC adapter, because you have the old AC adapters, okay? Well, fast forward a year later and you go to sell those machines and you go to find those AC adapters, comes to find out it was one of them was missing it. Well, you signed for it, that it was there, so where is it? So that's why it's important that you check all the contents, and then if it's something that you're not used to or you don't know how to set up, it's best to look at the instructions. And again, this is an IT fundamentals course, so again, this is kind of a fundamental thing, as sometimes you have to read the instructions. Even something simple like setting up a monitor, well, if you don't set it up right, if you don't have it screwed into the right screws, let's say for the mount, or it's not, maybe you miss a screw when you're setting it up, and then 6 months later, you're getting a help desk ticket that says, hey, my monitor fell off my desk. It was because you didn't do it properly. Make sure if it's something that you're not familiar with, to read the instructions, okay? Nobody should ever fault you for wanting to read the instructions, especially when you're first starting out. I know myself, if I had a employee and they were like, hey, TJ, do you mind if I just read the instructions so I know how this works? Absolutely, I want you to, because chances are you might actually teach us something about it. So making sure that you read the instructions is super important, especially when it's something new that you've never done before. Okay. Now, when you're setting up your computer, you want to make sure that there are no trip hazards, number one. Okay. So again, I'm going to use the school because I come from school IT. That's where I've been in since 2007. Okay. So that's what I know. That's the world that I know. So let's say I was going into a teacher's room and I was setting up a new computer. Would I have a USB cable going through the center of their room to hook up their smartboard just on the ground? No, because the first thing that's going to happen is a student's going to trip over it. And again, it might sound silly. Like, of course you wouldn't do that. I've seen it. Okay, I've seen people do it. So make sure that you aren't introducing any safety issues in the environment. Okay, especially if it's at like somewhere where it is kind of a high traffic area. The last thing you want is somebody to like come into the office for an appointment and trip over something, and then that company is now held liable because of that. You know what I mean? So just double check that there are no trip hazards at all. Finally, making sure that airflow is coming through, that's important, but finally, making sure that the computer is usable, okay? You don't want the computer being on the ground, and then the mouse cord is stretched so tight that the user can't use the mouse. It's like all the way at the top of their desk. No, you're gonna have to maybe go get a power strip, or you might have to get a USB extension. Do whatever you can to make sure that that user is super, super comfortable when you're connecting everything. Okay, next we're going to connect any peripherals like our mice and our keyboard. And then finally, we're going to plug in the power cables and make sure that it powers on. That's all you got to do when you're setting up a personal computer. Now, when it comes to the certification, like what kind of questions would they be looking for from a slide like this? It's mostly going to be the safety related questions, okay? Or things that have to do with liability, whether that's the liability that you're taking on with the whole checking of the contents, or introducing a liability like the trip hazard that we had talked about before. And you might have something like airflow, like don't just shove the computer in a desk. Make sure that air can get to it, because heat is the enemy of computers. Okay, another question that might come up, they might have one question about ergonomics. So ergonomics is how when you're using the device, how is it comfortable to use it where you're not putting any strain on like your wrists or your back or your neck, whatever that might be. So for example, by my keyboard, I have this nice little pad that my wrists kind of lean on, and it makes it very comfortable. It also makes it from me going like this to something a little bit more comfortable. This is the first time in my career that I remember ever using something like this, but it came with my keyboard, so I am using it. And it's perfect because I can talk to you and talk to you about cool things like this. But there's also this idea of sitting at the monitor. Like they should be able to look directly at the monitor. They shouldn't have to look down or look up, okay? And nowadays you have to take into consideration, well, what if they are standing, okay? So like right now, look how I went out of camera. So if the monitor is the camera, then I'm gonna have to make an adjustment for that user. So it's important that you do have a conversation with that user to make sure that it is comfortable for them using it. Remember, you're setting up the computer for them, not for you. Now, sometimes you're going to go into a room and the user's not going to be there, so you kind of have to eyeball it or send them an email following up saying, hey, I set up that computer monitor. I just wanted to make sure that it's comfortable for you. We don't have to raise something up or lower anything. So it's always good to over communicate in situations like that, okay? So moving on, let's talk about navigating an operating system, okay? First and foremost is signing into a computer, okay? So when you go onto your computer for the first time, you're probably going to be presented with a screen that shows like a username and a password. So you can see here, we have James at CompTIA, for example, and then a place to put in their password. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about signing on. We're going to talk about launching some software applications. We're going to talk about managing data files. And then we're going to talk about just some configuring of a different system, so a Windows system, for example. So when a machine first boots up, you have what's called post, and that is the power on self-test. Okay, so what that does, it's kind of like when you wake up in the morning, okay? And when you wake up, just kind of visualize this with me. Your eyes open up, you kind of feel down your neck, down your fingers, down your spine, your butt, down to your knees and your toes. Okay, so try that. Next time you wake up, I want you to have your own power on self-test where you're just kind of making sure everything is there and it's working properly. Well, computers do that exact same thing, okay? So they make sure that the RAM is working. They make sure that the hard drives are there. They go through and they test their own internal hardware. Now, this isn't like an extensive test. It doesn't take a very long time. What it is, it's just more of a functionality check, if you will, just to make sure that the RAM's working. And if the RAM works, then the video comes up and it boots into the operating system, okay? So just note that it's going to do a power on self-test first, check its hardware, kind of checks itself, and then moves to kind of the Windows boot up process, okay? So on this screen here, we have the user is James at CompTIA. You can see where they can put their password in. You'll see some other features here, like in case they forgot their password, they can do the reset. And they also have the other options there. So if they like have a PIN instead of a password, they're able to put that on there as well. Okay, so this is where the user is going to authenticate to the system. Okay, so then once we log in, we're going to see a screen like this. So we can see that number one, that is our most used apps. So that's going to be kind of our apps that we are logging on and using all the time. So in this case, it's Paint, it's any tips, settings, things like that. But this is where all of our applications are going to live. Okay, so then over here, these are what are called our live tiles. Microsoft is kind of shying away with this, but you might see some questions like this on the certification test itself. Those live tiles just represent applications or kind of a different. Microsoft used to have like a mobile phone that had this kind of similar interface, but we're seeing less and less of that. On the bottom here, you can see number 4. These are our pinned icons. I use this quite a bit for the applications that I use on a daily basis. So for example, Edge, Spotify, Evernote, Discord, Putty, Terminal. Those are all some things that are pinned on my own personal desktop because I use them all the time. I don't want to have to sort through over here on the app section in order to find them. It's just easier if I pin them to the bottom. Note that word that I'm using there is pinning. When we're holding something on that taskbar, that means it's being pinned on there, okay? So then this other section that we have down here, this is our notification area. So down here on the bottom right, let me turn off my camera so it's not in the way. That's our notification area. So if we get a notification from an application similar to our phone, you'll see it kind of pop up from this area. This is also where we can quickly access our time and date settings, our network settings, our sound settings, Bluetooth, projection, a lot of our stuff that we need all the time. It's gonna be here, okay? And then the last thing that I wanted to point out is in order to access kind of this big square here, you see that? You hit the little button down here, okay? That's kind of messy. This little button down here, the Windows button, that's what you're going to want to click in order to make that menu pop up, okay? Or you can always hit the Windows key that is on the keyboard, and that is called our start screen or our start menu when we press that Windows key there, okay? So like I mentioned there, we have our live tiles, instant search. So I use that quite a bit, and all you have to do is hit the Windows key and start typing. And then, so let's say I was looking for Notepad. I could just hit the Windows key and just start typing Notepad, and it would actually come up on the screen and it would instantly open that for me. So that's the instant search. So if you see any questions about it, that's what they mean, is that you just press Windows and just start typing. Again, some pretty easy stuff if you use Windows before. If you're a Mac user, it would be like hitting Command Space and start typing. That's the same thing as instant search. And if you've never been on a Mac, that's how you do it on a Mac. See, look at that, a little bonus in there. So if you want to customize what is on your taskbar, then what you can do is open up an app. The easiest way to do it is just open up an app, right click on it, and pin. And then what that'll do, it'll keep it there on the bottom. So if you need to use it in the future, it'll always be there. Even if you close the application, if it's pinned, it'll stay there, okay? Another thing, you can group tiles, which means just taking like different, let's say you want to put that tile and that tile together. You could go through and you could like make groups. So those groups are life at a glance and play and something else. But again, they're really going away from this, especially with Windows 11. So just know that you can group tiles in Windows 10. But again, going forward, if you're on a newer version of the IT fundamentals, you probably won't have to talk about that. And then finally, the stuff that's on the taskbar. So like the first thing that I do when I set up a Windows machine is I go through and remove everything, pretty much everything on that taskbar. So there's like the weather and stuff. I minimize that or totally get rid of it. Cortana, totally get rid of that. What else? Pretty much I like to have that bottom bar clean. And the easiest way to do that is really just to right click on it and you'll see all of your taskbar settings, and you can go in there and like toggle whether you want search on or off, or if you want, the apps and notifications and you want that kind of stuff in there. But I just like it to be simple. I don't need that stuff there. If I want that information, I'll go get it. But if you like it, that's cool. Leave it on there. It's your computer, not mine. And also, remember, it's your user's computer and not yours. So again, ask the user, how would they like it to be set up? Because again, we are servicing them. It's their computer. It's their world. We're just a guest in it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about mice and or touchpads. Okay. So pretty much with any newer laptop, whether that be a Chromebook, Windows, or a Mac, a lot of them are going to have what's called multi-touch. And what that means is you can kind of use the gestures like you do on your phone in order to access things, or you can just tap it in order to select things, whether that's on the left side or the right side. But as you can see on the kind of the diagram here, you also have the ability to use the buttons. Okay, so if you tap on the right side, it'll be your right click. If you tap on the left side, it'll be your left click. Okay, same thing is true with dragging and dropping. So with dragging and dropping, it's where you select something and then you move it and let go. You drag it and then you drop it. Okay, so you do that by mousing over something, left, right, left click on it, let go, or move it over and then let go. That is dragging and dropping. Okay, and then with most laptops, you'll be able to scroll with just 2 fingers, scrolling up or down. Some older laptops, this little section on the right-hand side, that was what used to be used for scrolling on some older laptops. The same thing if you want to do like a horizontal scroll, it would be that one right there. So that's if you want to go left or right. So again, if you are new to computers as a whole, that was probably new to you. But if you've ever used a laptop, this is all going to be some review. Okay, so nothing crazy quite yet. Okay, so using a keyboard, pretty easy, right? We type on it, but there are a couple things that you'll need to know. Okay, so along the top, you'll see that there are keys that have like F's by them. Those are your function keys, okay? And a lot of times, especially with newer keyboards, they'll kind of have dual functions, okay? So for example, on mine, my F1 key is also my mute key. So if I just press it regularly, depending on how it's configured, it's either going to be the F key or it'll mute it. Okay, so now if I want to change the function of what that does, I'm going to hit the FN key and then press that button, because you're telling the keyboard, hey, I want you to do your other function. Okay, I don't want you to do whatever the default is. I want you to do this other function. So it's like a key can do 2 different things by using your other key, and that's called a modifier key. So that modifier key, in this case, it is our function modifier key. It changes what the function buttons do. It's very similar to if you want capital letters, you would hold the shift key when you press it. Or if you wanted all of them, maybe you had like 10 letters that you wanted to be capitalized, you would just hit the caps lock button. Okay, a caps lock button locks you in to all capital letters. So if you needed to like yell something out loud and be very raw about it, you would hit caps lock before you type it, because then it's all going to be capital letters, and that means we're yelling. Okay, so again, modifier keys just change kind of what a key does. Specific ones are the function key for your function buttons, and then your shift key for your letters in order to make them capital or not. Okay, a couple other keys that are important. The Windows key, like we talked about earlier, that's useful if you want to get quick access to the start menu, hit just pressing it and then start typing. If you hit Windows key and then R at the same time, it'll actually bring up the run command, which is super useful. So if you want to open up your command prompt, you could hit Windows key R, type CMD and hit enter. Little power user tip there for you. Same thing is true with Notepad. You can hit Windows key R, type Notepad or Calc, C-A-L-C. All these different applications have kind of shortcut keys to them. And you can access them by going to the run command by doing Windows key and R. Backspace and delete. So backspace will go that way. Or like, so if we're typing a sentence and we wanted to go back. So let's say we were typing here and we wanted to go back one, we would use the backspace key. Okay. The difference between backspace and delete is backspace goes that way, where delete will go that way. So if I wanted to, for example, let's say we wanted to delete the T in positions, I would go to the I, press delete, it would delete the T. If I went to the I and hit backspace, it would delete the I. Okay, so it's just which way you want it removed. Most of the time, if you're typing, you're probably going to use backspace, but sometimes you just need to quickly just delete one thing. You can mouse over to it or arrow over to it and hit delete. So again, hopefully this is probably a review for you, but if you have specific questions about keyboard, or you're like, hey, what does this numlock key, what does that do? Spoiler alert, it makes it so you can use the little numpad that we have on our keyboards over here. But let's say you don't know what a key on your keyboard does. Just go ahead and leave it in the comments below, and I'll be sure to look it up and answer that question for you. Okay. So using a touchscreen, so chances are, if you've navigated here, you're probably doing it on a device that either you used a touchpad or a screen to view it. You might have used a mouse as well, but chances are you probably have a phone or mobile device. So gestures are what we need to talk about. So by tapping, that's going to be just like a left mouse click. If we tap and hold, that's going to usually be our right mouse click. If we pinch and stretch, so like I was making that motion earlier, so if you want to zoom in, you start at the center and work your way out. If you want to zoom out, you start at the outside and move your way in. Okay, so that's the kind of gesture motions. Swiping, so most of the time starting on the edge and going that way will take you back. Starting at this edge, going that way will take you forward. Again, just kind of experiment with this. Depending on the device that you're on, it's going to be changes, or it's going to change. But these are kind of the more common ones. Swiping down from the top, a lot of time that's like the refresh. So you'll right where the application starts, not all the way to the top, because that'll probably bring down notifications. But in the actual application, if you start towards the top and drag and then let go, a lot of times that'll refresh the screen. So again, every device is different, and I urge you to try different devices so that way you can understand how the different devices work. So this is important. So I realized in teaching this content that not everybody knows the differences between files that might show up on your desktop, okay? And what I mean by that is if you're looking at your desktop and you have a file there, is that where it's living, or is it just a shortcut to that file, and that file really lives in your documents folder, okay? Did you know that you could actually make shortcuts? Let's say the file's in your documents folder. If you right click and hit send to desktop, it's not sending that whole file to your desktop. You're really just pointing, you're making a little desktop shortcut that says, hey, look here. Look here. It actually lives in the documents folder. And when you double click on it, it goes to that folder, the documents folder, and then opens up that file. It's not actually living on your desktop. Unfortunately, there's been times where when I worked at Geek Squad, this was many moons ago, when someone said, oh yeah, I backed up all my stuff, and then come to figure out they just backed up those desktop shortcuts. They didn't back up the original files, and they lost everything. So just be cognizant of what these different things mean, okay? So the file here, so for a Word document, for example, we could see here this very first one, this is our file. Now, the difference between it and the shortcut is this little arrow right there, okay? That little arrow there is what says, hey, this is a shortcut to the file. The actual file won't have that little arrow. It won't be there on the actual file itself, okay? The next one is a folder, just like a manila file folder. There's just a document inside it. So if this folder was on your desktop and you could see that little Word document, that means there's a file inside of the folder, okay? So files go inside folders. Next, we have our actual application itself, and that is the Word application. So you can see there, Word 2016, for example. Notice how it looks different than the other ones. The other ones are actual, they look like documents. And what I mean by documents is like the paper that's there. Those are the actual files themselves, whereas below it's just the application itself. And when it comes to Microsoft, you can't really back up applications. You'd have to reinstall applications. So unless you image the entire machine, which we'll get into imaging later on, but imaging is just like taking a snapshot of a computer. Unless you do that and then bring that image back on, there's not really a good way to back up applications on the Windows side of things. It's best just to do a clean install, okay? And the final thing that we have here is our different drive icons, or device icons rather. So the one on the left is a hard drive that has Windows installed. Notice that it has that little Windows icon right there. Next one over is BD, or Blu-ray disc drive. So that is you notice how it looks a little bit different than the hard drive. And it has that BD, that means Blu-ray disc. CD or DVD would also show up, depending on if they're CDs or DVDs. And then this is our printer here. Now, I wanted to make a note here. Do you see how that little icon is on that printer right there? What that is that's saying it's your default printer, okay? So if you have a list of printers and that little check mark's on one, that one's your default, okay? So the check mark won't be on all of your printers, okay? Hopefully that makes sense to you. So here, this is, I believe, is our last slide. So what we have here is when you open up File Explorer or Explorer on Windows, just a couple things that I want to talk about on the actual user interface itself. Okay, so the first one here, up here, we see this number 1. That is saying where you're currently located at. So when you open it up for the first time, it'll be this PC or the computer that you're currently on. And you'll notice that it also shows here where you're located. Okay, so you're at this PC. If I were to double click on, let's say, the C drive that's down here, then it would show in that area, it would actually show the C drive as our location. Okay, so that's just showing kind of where you're at. Over here, we have a couple of icons that can do different things. The first one, the little bar right there, let me clear the drawings and just say that little bar right there, that's actually going to minimize all of your stuff. Okay, so if you click on that, it's going to just bring it down into the taskbar, and you'll be able to see your desktop or any windows that you have behind it. Okay, so the next one that's there, that is your maximize. So if you wanted for it to take up the entire screen, that's where that would actually show up. So if you click on that, it'll take up the entire screen. And then our final one that we have right here, the X, that will close out everything that you're doing. Okay, so this layout is similar on Mac. It's just on the other side, and they're just different colors. So green, yellow, and red. But that's a little bit outside the IT fundamentals course. But just if you will go to a Mac computer and you don't see those little icons there, look on the other side for those little multicolored ones. That's what those ones do as well. Okay. So next we have our it's called a ribbon UI. So this ribbon here allows you to do different things based on the actual folder that you're in. So in this case, we have our different properties for this file, or for this folder, sorry. We can open it, we can rename it, and then from there we can do other things. So if we wanted to maybe access a folder that's on the network somewhere, you can see that we have that option there. Or maybe we want to add a network location. So instead of just sharing a drive, maybe we want to add a entire different location. We could do that as well. That has many folders on there. We can go through and maybe we want to quickly uninstall a program or look at our system properties. Okay, that's based on kind of what you can do in this folder or in this view is different based on kind of where you go. So, and also this ribbon will change based on the option that you have up here on the top. Those are different options that'll change that ribbon UI. So I do urge you just to kind of play with that. You won't break anything by clicking through them. Computers are really hard to break nowadays, so I definitely urge you to play around and just kind of navigate around and just see kind of what the different buttons and stuff do on your computer. Okay, so the last thing that we have here, number 4. So I want to pull your attention over here to this area. There's a lot of different ways that you can access files on your Windows system. Okay, so you can double click on these icons here, and they will kind of go down in a tree view. And when you do that, over here will also refresh. Okay, and your location of this PC will then change to, let's say, the C drive, and then you'll see a tree. So the way this is laid out over here, this is called a tree. Okay, so you have your top levels of things, and then when you click on one, it's down here, and maybe you open up another one, and then it opens up. It's like a tree. So think about leaves on a tree. It's kind of that same idea. Okay, so that's going to be more of like a tree view on different computers, whether that's actually any, so Mac, PC, anything, that's considered a tree view. I think that's pretty much it as far as just kind of the base level of navigating your system and setting up a computer system. If you are on the paid course, there will be a lab for this module where we actually go through and navigate and some of those run commands and stuff that I talked about. Those will be in there. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you have absolutely any questions, feel free to reach out in the comments below. If you're in the course, go ahead and put it in the course comments. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good day.